Welcome to the UK column listeners. I am delighted to be here in the depths of Cornwall, and I've been invited to sit with a gentleman called Ross. We're in an area called Cornwall, and the subject really is what's happening in the Church of England, with the Church of England in Cornwall. So Ross, thank you very much for inviting me down. And where do we begin with this little story? I think the first place is for you to tell us a little bit about the church, because a lot of people aren't engaged with the church. They're not engaged with the Church of England. So how long have you been associated with the Church of England, and why do you think it's been an important part of your life?
I've been engaged with the Church of England for actually about 40 years, if I come to think about it. I grew up attending church, but mostly non-conformist churches. And then when I was in my very early 30s, I started going to the Church of England church where I lived. Sometimes there have been periods of my life which have been extremely difficult, and the church has been a place of great solace for me. It's been a great help to me, and I met one particularly charismatic and understanding clergyman who did a lot for me. And going to church regularly and church life has become very, very important for me.
Ross, Cornwall has a very rich history with regard to the Christian church, and I don't know the exact figure myself, but how many churches are there in Cornwall, do you think?
Well, I would think that there are just over 200 actual churches, but I think we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that there are 300 plus Celtic Christian sites in Cornwall. And I would just like to quote from Canon Pat Robson, who developed the Celtic Christian pilgrimage, which is being used by lots of people who either live or who come on holiday to Cornwall. These are churches, she says, founded by ancient saints, searching out quiet places to be alone with God. Over hundreds and hundreds of years, they have become steeped in love and prayer and long to offer sanctuary to everyone who needs it. So these are the Celtic Christian sites in Cornwall, and that gives us a feel for people using the churches who are not necessarily part of the regular congregation, and that's something I think that we should be bearing in mind. Who goes into churches when there's no one else there? They don't just sit there empty all day, every day. People quietly go into them, they write prayer requests, they sit quietly. They are places of sanctuary.
And I understand that some people will deliberately choose to go into a church when nobody else is there. They're not regular church goers, but they do enjoy being able to go into a church when it's a quiet place that they can access on their own. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct. For various reasons, I have cause to go into church at times which are not when services are being held, and invariably either someone is already there or someone may come in while I am there and they just want to sit quietly. They might want to walk around and look at the stained glass, but they might just want to sit there quietly and have their own thoughts, and that is the aspect of offering sanctuary to everyone who needs it.
Now, you contacted me because you were starting to see changes in the Church of England, and you were starting to perhaps be a bit concerned about the direction in which the church was going. So can you tell us a little bit about what you were seeing? What is the Church of England trying to do at the moment, and why would that start to raise some concerns with you?
Well, I think the project that's named On the Way, which began, interestingly enough, in Cornwall during lockdown. There are very similar projects in other parts of the country, which we can mention later on, but in Cornwall it began during lockdown, which was a very difficult time when the Archbishop of Canterbury had closed all the churches, so that even clergy themselves, clergymen, clergywomen, were not permitted inside their own churches, even on their own. They were not permitted to go into their church buildings at all. No services were happening, obviously, no congregations got together to talk about things, and yet the diocese began this new project called On the Way, which is a project which amalgamates churches, creates large collections of parishes and tries to turn them into one, under only one ordained member of the clergy, with a number of other people who are not ordained. And this takes away centuries of the organisation of the Church of England, whereby there are ordained clergy in individual parishes. So individual parishes lose their own clergy person. And Cornwall is very attached to its parishes. As you drive around in the car, you can see notices by the side of the road that says you are entering such and such parish. The whole idea of a parish with a clergy person to look after what's called the cure of souls, that whole concept is being abolished.
Okay, so we'll say for the ordinary listener, and particularly somebody who hasn't been involved with the church before, the original system was each church, you correct me if I haven't got this right, but each church would have its own vicar, and that vicar, as well as doing obviously running church services, was particularly there to look after the pastoral care of the parish itself. So this was a person who was working in the church in a spiritual way, but was also working in the parish council, in the parish itself, in order to look after people in the parish. So we have one vicar, one church, one vicar, and now we have a project which is effectively saying, if I've got this right, that we're going to have one vicar for multiple churches. Is that right?
Yes, that is correct. Obviously, over quite a long period of time, churches have been put together in a much smaller way. There are quite a lot of areas of Cornwall where there isn't just one clergy person, one vicar with one church. There may have been vicars looking after perhaps 4 churches, which is quite a lot of work. That now is being increased to, in one instance in Cornwall, about 22 churches with I believe, 2 ordained members of the clergy. But it is unmanageable, unrecognisable from the system that used to be. When a member of the clergy comes to a parish as a new vicar or a new rector in some instances, one of the things that they promise to do is to have what's called the cure of souls. And this is a very long-standing, quite old-fashioned sort of expression, which means that that person is responsible for the soul of every person who lives in that parish. So it doesn't matter whether you're a churchgoer or whether you're not a churchgoer, the vicar actually is there for you. If you don't go to church on Sundays, you can still have your child baptised in church, and a lot of people still do. You can still be married in church. Those two instances are going to become much more difficult if you have one vicar looking after a vast number of churches, which is what On the Way proposes, and in fact is what is actually happening in Cornwall now. So it is impossible for the clergy to look after the souls of 8 parishes, for instance.
Ross, you're very concerned about the loss of trained clergy under the diocese plan on the way. But of course, there are many people who are not the fully trained clergymen and women who do an awful amount of very good work for the church. So can you tell us about some of these other people that work in the church environment?
Well, the most obvious group who are not actually ordained are the lay ministers known as readers. They have been working in the Church of England for a very long time. They do a wonderful job in supporting clergy in parishes. But the prospective lay ministers in the On the Way plan that's a different setup altogether. The proposal is that they have quite a bit of responsibility for individual churches to a much greater degree than there's been previously. One of the big questions is how much training are they actually going to receive? If there is one clergy person responsible for anything from let's say 8 churches up to the 22 down in West Cornwall, there's going to be a much greater reliance on lay ministry. I think it is one of the worrying aspects of On the Way is understanding how much responsibility these people will actually be given. Certainly they're going to be taking services, but they will not be able to administer Holy Communion, one of the sacraments of the Church of England.
Okay, so there's the lay ministers, the readers, but there's also, I think, what would you call them, lay people in general who come and do good work with the church, and then of course they're retired clergy. How do those two groups fit in?
As far as the retired clergy are concerned, the Diocese of Truro wouldn't be able to have churches holding anything like the number of services that they do at the moment if retired clergy were not there. They are an absolute kingpin of the Diocese of Truro. All over the county, there are retired clergy taking services every Sunday. They are unpaid. They can submit expenses. Most of them choose not to do so. So that's another area where the church in Cornwall is being supported by people who are not paid. There are other what can we call them really? There are other lay people taking informal services in churches across Cornwall, and they, of course, are incredibly valuable. And again, the church could not be surviving without all these people to help. But they don't have overall responsibility for a church. And what appears to be the case is that the lay people in the On the Way project are going to be having quite a bit of responsibility.
Okay, is another reasonable question to go with that? Who is going to train these new people? Are they going that are being proposed under the On the Way project? Are those people going to be trained centrally, or are they going to be people that are trained within their own parish system?
I don't think I can actually answer that question. We believe that they will be trained within the Diocese of Truro. I don't know any more about that particular aspect of the plan.
Just because it seems in my head to follow on with this, this is quite a key thing. If you say you're going to essentially be replacing trained vicars with lay people, who those lay people are, how they're selected and how they're trained is a pretty critical issue, I would have thought.
It certainly is a critical issue. But for let's say an ordinary person like me, I don't know the answers to those questions. But you're quite correct that it is a very important aspect of the whole thing.
The church is not just looking to change those people and how they relate and what work they do and how many churches they look after. There's also another process which is going on, which I think please explain, because I don't understand it fully, but I believe it's to do with a sort of combining of church councils. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct. One of the aspects of On the Way, which is particularly worrying, is the intention for churches, once they are in an On the Way group, for them to combine their parochial church councils. And this is an absolute no as far as many people in Cornwall in the church are concerned. Parochial church councils are very powerful parts of the way churches are organised. Each church has its own parochial church council at the present time, unless they've already agreed to combine together. But churches need to understand that if they combine their PCCs, they will lose control of their own money. They will lose control of their own finances, because that one group PCC will be deciding what happens to the money. So although you may give to your church by, as John said, by standing order or by what's called putting money into the plate, it will be a group PCC that decides how that money is to be spent. And this is an aspect of On the Way which is particularly worrying, and PCCs of individual churches need to have the courage to say they are not going to do it. They have the power to say no. And there certainly is one area of Cornwall which I know about where the oversight minister was appointed and then suggested that the PCCs were combined, and there was actually widespread opposition to that. And I think I'm right in saying that the combination has not happened.
That's extremely interesting. What was just in my head is that, of course, if you combine these, you control the money, but what's actually happening is a centralisation of power, because instead of having to deal with 8 local churches and 8 groups of people who are the normal human beings, so they've got different ideas and different ideas and needs and wants, you combine them into one group, and then it's easier to control that group to get where you want to be. And maybe that's an expansion of the On the Way process, but maybe I'm being a bit suspicious.
Well, maybe you are being suspicious, but there are quite a number of other people in Cornwall who are very, very suspicious of this particular move to ask PCCs to combine into one. There could also be the question that how many, let's call them delegates or representatives of the churches, how many from each church? There could even be a suggestion that the larger the church, the more people they can have representing on that PCC. That's just a thought, but certainly this is a very, very dangerous move.
Right. Okay. So we got this interesting project on the way, and where has it come from? Why is the Church of England suddenly talking about this project?
Well, the Church of England, in some instances, is talking about this promise, saying that congregations are so diminished since COVID, which does have a great deal of truth attached to it, that churches have lost a lot of their members since the COVID episode, let's call it. But they also talk a very great deal about not having any money to pay clergy, and that certainly is one of the arguments that's being used in Cornwall. It was certainly the argument that was being put forward when On the Way was first mentioned, brought out. We don't have money to pay enough clergy, and that was said consistently, and a great many people took it on board. We have to accept this new project, that we can't have ordained clergy because there isn't the money to pay them. The Diocese of Truro has in fact backpedalled on that to a great extent and has had to admit that it's not 100% the case that there isn't enough money to pay clergy. This change is actually ideological, that the concept of a parish church with an ordained clergy person is now outdated, and the diocese wants to get rid of it.
So what people, if I have this correct, what people are being told is that there's no money to pay for the number of vicars needed for a one church, one vicar system, which is the historic system. There's no money for this. And of course, everybody, I think in any parish, would be aware of fundraising for the church. It's usually fundraising for the church roof. That's a very common thing for people to want to raise money for. But now we've got the church saying, well, we really haven't got money to be able to pay vicars, and the new way forward is that we're going to have to water down the system, and one vicar is going to have to look after multiple churches. And as you point out, that also means that one vicar is now going to have to deal with a great increased number of people to look after their souls. So how is this new agenda from the Church of England, how is this manifested within the parishes? I mean, did it come out as a written edict that this is what we have to do because we haven't got any money? How is this policy appearing in the parishes?
There were a great many meetings took place between representatives of the diocese and church wardens and parochial church councils to tell them about this new scheme. Lots of assurances that everything would be fine because there were going to be new lay people, in other words, not ordained people, who were going to be able to take services. So there would still be church services, but they would not be taken by, if you like, qualified, ordained members of the clergy. And these people would be appointed over the whole diocese, so that vicars would have, if you like, people who were working with them. One of the most obvious responses to this is that if you don't have an ordained member of the clergy taking a congregation, you cannot have a service of Holy Communion. And this, for a great many people, is a great loss, because the taking of Holy Communion is a very special part of Christian life in the Anglican Church, and suddenly it's not going to be there. So that's one of the big effects of it. Lay ministry is what it's called, and lay ministry is going to be expanded massively.
Right. So this is a very interesting concept. If we put this in terms of a commercial organisation, instead of having fully qualified people doing their jobs, in order to save money, you're going to bring in people who are not qualified. We could say they're amateurs. They may be enthusiastic amateurs, but they're going to be amateurs. And so the Church of England is saying, well, we haven't got any money. We're going to bring in amateurs to do what we're doing. Ross, you are clearly very concerned with what's happening. And from what you've told me previously, it's clear that there are more people becoming concerned with the church. So how are people responding in the parish to this new edict, this new way forward? Are they upset? Are they challenging it?
There are a great many people in Cornwall who are very upset about what has happened, what has already happened in their church, the loss of an ordained clergyman or clergywoman. I'd like to give you an example of one of the things that happened. In a particular part of Cornwall, there was a village church which needed a new roof. And the church themselves started an appeal for a large sum of money to be able to repair the roof. And the village was incredibly supportive. People worked very hard. Grants were applied for, which the church was awarded a number of grants, but a great deal of money was raised by the village, by a great many people who were not attenders of the local church. And the roof was replaced, and the church arranged for there to be a service of celebration for the finish of this work. And an archdeacon, a senior ordained person in the diocese, was invited to the service. And that archdeacon stood in the pulpit and spoke to the congregation about how church buildings, Anglican church buildings with a vicar, were a thing of the past. That people should stop thinking that this is what church was about. And here were people who had raised the money to repair the roof. And that member of the clergy stood in the pulpit and told them it was a thing of the past, that they would have a church there in that village.
So, Ross, this is extraordinary, because this is almost as though the Church of England is unfolding a policy across Cornwall in this instance that is actually going to not only water down the influence of the churches and the place of the churches in society in Cornwall, but it's also going to be undermining them. We're going to see churches in Cornwall disappear, and the Church of England, from its highest level, is saying, well, this is okay. We're going to have to lose churches in order to move forward.
That's exactly what they're saying. They're saying that organised religion in this way is a thing of the past, that forms of worship need to be taken out into the community, to go to football fields or shopping centres, in people's private homes. That's the way. That is now the way forward. And there are churches in a whole number of places in the Diocese of Truro, which have started to be used as community centres. Community centres which do a whole variety of things and which also happen to have services on a Sunday.
This is extremely interesting, and I'll just add that a number of people have pointed me at some comments which are actually online. I think that they're actually connected with Save the Parish in Cornwall. But there's a particular gentleman called John Kenner, if I pronounced that name correctly. And he's written, and this is available to the public at large, but he's written some very interesting comments. He says that as treasurer of a church in East Cornwall, he's asked to be replaced. And he's written an article, and I'm going to read a little bit of his article in just a moment, but he says he's happy for it to be widely shared. And he says, I think what is happening is morally wrong, and he profoundly disagrees with the Diocese of Truro's MMF policy and spending plans, and the MMF is Mission and Ministry of Fund. So let me just read a little bit of what he says. He says this: the Church of England has a problem. Congregations are falling. It is making changes with fewer clergy and larger groups of churches. I live in Cornwall, where the changes go under the title of On the Way. Save the Parish in Cornwall argues that these changes are going to make things worse, and it is campaigning against their implementation. I, for one, cannot see how anyone could claim that the changes will make things better for parish churches, so conclude that the changes have a different aim. During his time in office, the recently departed Archbishop of Canterbury presided over a 30% decline in congregations. He blamed it on God. And then there's a quote: I'm not sure I know what else could have been done, because in the end the future of the church and its survival or otherwise does not depend on archbishops. It depends on God and the providence of God. And John continues, all the indications are that those at the top have concluded that the decline will continue, and that in the long term parish churches are a lost cause. Now the Church of England has an income of around £360 million from property and investment, so archbishops and bishops and their support staff and a lot else besides will still be viable even when the last parish church is boarded up. But if it's not going to look incongruous as an admiralty with no ships or the hospital in Yes Prime Minister with no patients, it has to find a new role for itself. Cornwall's Bishop Hugh, when talking about On the Way on Politics Southwest, said there will be slightly fewer clergy if this plan is fully implemented, but there will be more people doing work on behalf of the church, including, for instance, more people working with children and young people, and more people working in the kind of things we do to support people in the most deprived communities, so food banks and debt support. Ross, I think you're aware of this particular piece of text by John, the treasurer of a church. What do you think about what he said? Do you agree with what he said? Do you understand with what he's talking about?
I understand exactly what he's talking about, and I agree with him 100%. I agree with him 100%. Yes, interestingly, where John says that the Church of England is going to continue with its bishops and its administrators, but there won't be any church. Interestingly, at the present time, the Diocese of Truro has about 61 names on its list of people who work for them, who don't work in churches at all. These are people who work in the diocese's admin offices, and that number of people is just about equal to the number of clergy working in the diocese. So that head office, if you like, has this extraordinary number of people working at it, and in fact this gentleman has attached an appendix with the list of all the people who are working in the diocese, and it's equal to the number of clergy who are actually working in parishes. I can't give you the concrete evidence, but it is acknowledged even by the church commissioners that projects like On the Way, which have existed in other parts of England, have not been a success. The most notable one that we know about happened in Wigan, where the project was eventually closed down. A number of churches had closed completely. The church commissioners declared the project to have been a failure. And yet here we are in Cornwall with an almost identical project being pushed ahead by the suffragan bishop, who is acting bishop of Truro at the moment, and his advisors and staff in the diocese. So a project which has been shown not to work in other parts of the country, and yet in Cornwall it's being steamrolled ahead.
I'm obviously learning as you're talking me through this, and I've learned a lot from reading the text that John wrote. Let me just read another bit, and then for the audience I'll read out some of the diocesan team that you're referring to. You're saying, well, on one hand, the Church of England is saying they haven't got enough money to pay vicars to do the proper job of a vicar, but on the other hand, there's a huge team working for the diocese, which is obviously costing a huge amount of money. I'll come on to that team in a minute. Let's listen to another quote from this gentleman called John. He says, there is surely a question as to whether the PCCs, the parochial church councils, are doing the right thing in paying the MMF, which is described as voluntary. People like me give some money from their pension or income to support various good causes of their choice. And I used to believe that what I gave my local church benefited my local church. If I'd wanted to support the wider work of the Church of England, I would have given to that cause. The parochial church councils are not only trustees of a charity whose first duty is to make sure the charity's assets are only used to support or carry out its purposes, they are also entrusted by donors with their money. How can the PCC assume it has donors' approval to give away their money when it has no idea what it will be spent on, and when the amount requested is based purely on what the diocese thinks it can get away with, rather than specified needs? In the case of my own church, I very much doubt those who give to the church by standing order or via the collection plate realise that 59% of everything they give goes to pay the MMF. And let's remind people that's the Mission and Ministry Fund. I didn't, and I was horrified when I found out. It all seems far removed from what is most important to me: worshipping God with others, maintaining an old building to worship in, and trying to make a difference to our community. And after this statement, John goes on to list some of these positions in the diocesan team. And let's read out a few. We're not going to name people because that would be unfair, but we can talk about their positions. So we've got an operations department, which has an operations manager, an operation assistant, creation care, an operations assistant, safeguarding, an operations assistant, database administrator. We have buildings, environment and land, a DAC secretary. We have a diocesan environment officer, an operations assistant, a cut carbon support officer, brackets churches, church buildings and support officer. Under change and renewal, we have a director of change and renewal. We have a program manager. We have a project support officer, Carnmouth North. We have a project support officer, East Wivelshire. We have a project support officer, Kerrier. We have a project support officer, Carnmouth South. We have a data analyst, and we have a project support person for change and renewal. We have a head of communications. We have an out-of-hours communication support. And then we have a let me count these, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 deanery liaison officers. We have, under governance, a diocesan secretary. We have a head of operations and governance. We have 2 information and governance officers. And under education, we have director of education, education governance lead, education support officer, schools creation care officer, cut carbon support officers of school, and then it moves into finance. And then later, after a few more posts, it does actually get into the ministry aspect. So I've not met this gentleman called John, and I must say I'd be fascinating to meet him because he's really gripping the heart of the matter. On one hand, we have the Church of England telling its parishioners that we don't have money to repair the churches, we don't have money to pay for the vicars, and yet we have, how do I describe this? Well, I could ask you, Ross. This is almost a quasi...
It's a corporate structure, yes. That's how a great many of us view it. It's a corporate structure. It becomes more inflated every year.
And we don't know the value of salaries amongst these people because it's not clear who of them are full-time paid staff and who are volunteers, possibly.
Well, there are certainly a number of staff who are only part-time.
So when this policy came into Cornwall, the Bishop of Truro was the main person who seemed to be projecting it. He was the person who was effectively selling it to the Christians in Cornwall. How did he do that? What did the Bishop of Truro at that stage have to say about this new policy?
Can we name the person who was Bishop of Truro at that time?
Sir?
Bishop Philip Mount Stephen, who moved from the Diocese of Truro to the Diocese of Winchester. And we are awaiting a new bishop who's due to be coming next month. In the intervening period, the suffragan bishop, if you like, the junior bishop of Truro, has been pushing ahead with this, Bishop Hugh. And it does seem that the number of staff working at the diocese simply consistently increase, whilst the number of, if you like, qualified, ordained clergy diminishes, so that at some point, if this were to continue, there would be almost no ordained clergy in Cornwall, but the number of people working for the diocese would be exactly the same.
I'm viewing this from outside the Christian circle in Cornwall, but as you described this, Ross, what comes into my mind is that it's almost like the senior figures in the church are trying to destroy the church structure in Cornwall.
That's exactly how it feels to a great many Anglicans in the diocese.
I know that he's now moved on, but did anybody challenge the Bishop of Truro? Did any of the parishes try and discuss what was happening and push back on what his plans were? And if they did, how did he react to that?
There certainly were people who questioned it and who tried to push back. The bishop reacted, frankly, with intense anger. That's the only way to describe it.
That's a pretty extraordinary statement, because one would have thought that a senior person in the Church of England, if he was carrying out God's work in a Christian spirit, would have reacted in a very understanding way to somebody that was trying to challenge what he's doing. So to be told that he got angry, I think my brain says, why did he get angry? Why would he be angry because somebody was asking questions about what his policy was? Do you have an explanation for that?
I have no explanation for it, except that it felt positively dictatorial.
Today, what's the situation in Cornwall today with respect to this policy? Has everybody now accepted it and it's rolling out and there's nothing that can be done about it? Or do you think that there has been enough of a pushback from the people concerned in order to make people think and consider, is this the right policy? Is it a fait accompli now, or do you think there's still time for people to do things?
I think there is still time for this project to be halted. The crux of the matter is that PCCs, parochial church councils, and church wardens need to understand they don't have to do what a bishop tells them to do. Parochial church councils have considerable power, which a great many of them simply don't realise that they can say the word no. They don't realise that they can refuse to go ahead with the project. Even if they have agreed to do it in the past, they can still decide not to do it. Parochial church councils are very powerful bodies, in fact. They don't have to do what their own clergy tell them to do. They don't have to do what bishops tell them to do. In a county like Cornwall, which is largely rural, and which to some extent there is still a belief that if the diocese tells you to do something, you must do it. If the bishop tells you to do something, that you must do it. Actually, you don't have to do it. You can say no. And I think that's something that needs to be understood in the county as a whole. That if you're in one of the areas where there is one particular area in Cornwall where 22 churches have been effectively joined together with something like 2 ordained clergy, it's an absolute disaster. And no one can understand how those 22, possibly it might even be 23 churches, no one can understand how they have agreed to go ahead with it. Probably because they don't realise they can say the word no.
That's a very interesting point. Now I don't know, so I'm just looking at this I'm looking in from the outside. But what I have noticed in quite a lot of the documentation that I've seen coming out of the Church of England, not necessarily on matters to do with churches and the plan in Cornwall, but also for a wider objective across UK, is they are using in their documentation a lot of language which I regard as really highly political. It's the sort of language that you see coming out of the centralised government. In the job titles that I've just listed that John has pointed out, the moment I see cut carbon support, the Church of England talking about cut carbon support, this isn't spiritual comment. This is a political agenda which the Church has somehow gripped and is now, by sometimes I think using some fairly devious language, it's trying to draw its own congregation into following a political agenda. I'm being a little bit controversial here, but this is something that I certainly see going on. How is the church convincing local people that they should take on this new policy?
I wish I could answer that question, because I don't think I can answer it. It's interesting that you should be mentioning carbon, because in the diocesan budget for the year ahead that was agreed at a particular type of church meeting, which is called a synod, at the General Synod of the diocese meeting, which took place just a few weeks back. The budget was voted through. There was some opposition to it, which is very interesting. That opposition was largely, but not exclusively, coming from members who are associated with the organisation Save the Parish. But one of the items in the budget, which was of great concern, was the amount that the diocese plans to spend in the coming year on making alterations to parsonages, in other words, clergy houses, vicarages, to install triple glazing. So some of those houses will only have single glazing. Some of them actually have double glazing, but the project is to put triple glazing in all the parsonages. It seems that the Church of England is becoming more and more obsessed with saving the planet and less concerned with looking after people's souls. My argument would be that the primary purpose of the Church is the cure of souls, the looking after of your soul. There are millions of people saving the planet in one way or another. Let them do it. The Church of England doesn't need to abandon the cure of souls while it looks after the planet. It can hand that over to someone else while it sticks to its core function, which is the cure of souls.
Yeah, this is fascinating. While you were talking through that, my mind came back to an article that the UK column published back in January 2021, and it was entitled Welby's, that's Archbishop of Canterbury, of course, Welby's Church of England 2021, Trillions for gayer greed, but peanuts for the parish paupers. And gayer was a reference to saving the world, Mother Earth, which is an interesting concept because we could argue that that's completely out of the Christian belief system, but maybe that's for another time. But what was this article about? I'm certainly going to encourage people who listen to this this discussion with Ross today to go onto the UK column website and have a look for that. If you put Welby's Church of England 2021 into the search bar, you will find it. But what we were pointing out was that the Archbishop of Canterbury, in a number of public statements and articles, was very, very excited that he was able to work with international global corporations in order to raise money effectively to save the world through save the world from climate change and to protect the environment. And we were talking huge amounts of money. So the Archbishop of Canterbury was beside himself with happiness that he was able to work with these global corporations to raise multiple trillions of pounds, and the figure actually quoted was 17.12 trillion pounds sterling in order to save planet Earth. But you are sat with me saying this is remarkable because at the same time, well, the Archbishop of Canterbury, Welby's now moved on in disgrace. But at the time he was making this statement, people in the parishes were having to raise their own money to look after the church roof and to support their local vicar. So there's something very strange going on here, because we've got an immensely powerful Church of England still. It's got an Archbishop of Canterbury that is able to boast. He can be on a world stage with hedge funds and global businesses to raise trillions of pounds, 17 trillion pounds, to save the world. But when his representatives, the Bishop of Truro, is employed in Cornwall in order to look after the flock, the Christian people in Cornwall, then all of a sudden there's no money. We've got to get rid of vicars. We've got to group up churches. Unfortunately, we may lose some, but not to worry about that, because we're moving forward into a new era of the church in action. To me, I detect hypocrisy. I detect, unbelievable hypocrisy. I detect deceit, because if the Church of England is able to raise trillions on a world stage, why is it unable to raise a few million to support what's needed locally? And I detect that the priority is a political agenda rather than a spiritual agenda for local people. But you tell me, Ross, if I got this wrong.
I don't think you've got it wrong at all. I think there's a great deal of truth in what you say there, and personally, I'm very, very concerned about the Church's emphasis on, let's call it, saving the planet, as opposed to looking after people in other ways. But actually, just to take us off in a slightly different direction, there is also another agenda at work here, which is that there is a big push for taking the Church of England down what is known as the evangelical route, which is taking church out of the consecrated buildings and putting it out in virtually any other kind of building, in fact, and getting rid of traditional worship. There is a big push to get rid of traditional forms of worship. A great many churches have decided to do that already. There is the evangelical style of worship, very modern, not to use an organ but to have a worship band, not to have very many services of Holy Communion at all, not to use the orders of service that are sanctioned by the Church of England, to have church become
perhaps more acceptable to everybody.
There's a big push to say that evangelical styles of worship are the only way in which you will get young people into church. Actually, this is not necessarily true. It may be true in some areas, in some places. In other areas, it very much isn't what appeals to younger people if they are going to be interested in church. As far as Cornwall is concerned, there is a sizable proportion of the people of Cornwall who are of pensionable age, and for them, traditional forms of worship are very, very important. They find it impossible in many instances, not all, but in many instances, they find it impossible to adapt to the modern forms of worship. And in fact, we know very well that there are people who have left their own parish church because the forms of worship are no longer traditional or recognisable. Evangelical worship typically gets away with books. They don't like hymn books. And so the congregation is expected to read the words of the music, which are not called hymns, they're called songs. And the congregation is expected to read these from a large white screen, which is put up, often obliterating a view of the high altar with, let's say, a stained glass window behind it, so that those are no longer visible, and the congregation are expected to sing the words which are up there on the screen. The services are actually non-conformist, and you might be interested to know that the person at the Diocese of Truro who is responsible for the clergy recently appointed is not a member of the Church of England. He is a Methodist.
This is fascinating. I think we're going to have to be a little bit careful with the time here, because we're coming up to the top of the hour. But I'm just going to respond that we initially started out with raising questions about and concerns around the Church of England's programme for churches in Cornwall, and this new programme's been sold from the point that the church is saying it hasn't got money, when clearly it has got money, and now you're introducing a parallel policy, if I can use that expression, which appears to be watering down what it is to be a Christian within the Church of England itself. And I just wanted to add in, this came into my mind while you were talking, because it came to my attention that when King Charles presented or gave his Christmas speech to the nation, he did it from the Fitzrovia Chapel in London. And what I found interesting about this was, of course, to the wider public, it looked as if he was in a church and he was giving a Christmas message from within a church. And everything to do with the video clip of his talk reinforces that. You're in a chapel, it's a very beautiful chapel, the architecture is superb, and here is King Charles giving his Christmas message. But the reality is that that chapel is actually unconsecrated. And I was really stunned when I discovered this, because I thought it was incredibly deceitful of the king to be presenting himself as being within a Christian space, a place of Christian worship, when in actual fact it was nothing of the sort. It was an unconsecrated community space. And Ross, maybe this is me and it's a fault to me, but you're talking about the watering down of the Church of England and the Christian faith. And I just find it remarkable that I picked up in December, Christmas just gone, the king playing the same tricks, which was he was presenting himself as if he was in church, but actually he was not in church. He was in a community space. And if people want to understand a little bit more of that, the chapel itself was connected with a former Middlesex hospital, and it is not and was not ever consecrated. And I think it's impossible for anybody to suggest that King Charles did not understand that when he stood in front of the camera. I believe the opposite is true, that he knew perfectly well he was in an unconsecrated community space. And this was to give a softer message of what it is to be, inverted commas, Christian.
It's very interesting, but because, of course, in a way, a similar sort of thing happened during lockdown when the Archbishop of Canterbury had closed all the Anglican churches, as I said previously, had forbidden clergy to go into their own churches, and he celebrated communion on the Easter Sunday in his kitchen at Lambeth Palace. And this caused widespread, I would use the word disgust amongst many, many people in the Church of England who said he had a perfectly good consecrated space, a chapel inside Lambeth Palace, and he did not use it to celebrate Holy Communion or the Eucharist, as it's known to some people, on probably the most important day of the Church's year, which was Easter Sunday, the day that celebrated the resurrection of the Son of God. He chose to celebrate it in his kitchen, and that was so offensive to so many people within the Church, and he, as Archbishop of Canterbury, appeared not to be aware that what he was doing would upset so many people.
Well, that's a very interesting point, and I wasn't aware that he'd done that, and it's very interesting to understand that now. But of course, we'll remind the audience that this is the same Archbishop of Canterbury that had to resign his position for failing to protect vulnerable people from abuse within the Church of England. So we can use the word, I think, duplicitous quite safely, that whatever's been going on at the top of the Church of England, it seems that leadership for what it is to be a Christian and what the Christian Church should be doing, this has been falling away. Let's just end with, I think, something a little bit more direct. So, Ross, you've taken us through a lot of very interesting points around what's happening, almost an undermining of the Church in Cornwall. What would you say to people in the congregations of churches in Cornwall? What should they, and in the parishes, what should people be doing in order to challenge what is being, I'm going to say, enforced on them? What can people do in order to speak out and stop this agenda?
I think there should be an absolute concentration on putting forward this absolute fact that you do not have to do what the diocese tells you. They may threaten you with closure, because you won't have a priest, so you'll have to close the church anyway. If enough people actually put their heads above the parapet and say, actually, we are not going to do this, I think the diocese will have to take notice. They can be very frightening, there is no doubt about that. But I think the word needs to get out there widely that parochial church councils and church wardens can say the word no. There hasn't been enough of that in Cornwall. And certainly the organisation Save the Parish, which is working very hard to get information out to people on how to withstand what actually feels like a steamroller on behalf of the diocese. It's time for people who really believe this is the wrong way for us to be going. We should be looking at more ordained clergy in parishes, not taking the way for those members of the clergy to get out there in their own parishes, to be seen in the local petrol station, to be seen in the local shop, to be a living, obvious, visible part of a parish, to show how important they are and the work that they are willing to do. There needs to be people ready to stand up and say, actually, we're not going to do this. We are not going to do it.
No is a powerful word to use. But of course, to use the word no also requires courage.
It does require courage. It does require courage. And the diocese, the hierarchy, if you like, in the diocese, know very well that they have behaved very threateningly towards members of the clergy who have tried to withstand on the way. There have been rumours of disciplinary action. I say rumours of disciplinary action. It does take courage, and it's in the New Testament. It's there that Jesus said, "You will need courage to withstand the things that happen if you do things which are in my name." So have courage. My words were to be, have courage.
You've pointed out how important it is for people to have the courage to stand up and speak out about what's happening. What else would you say that people need to do in order to fight back against what's happening? Not only just in the church, but probably in our wider lives, because I think more and more people realise that something's badly wrong. They no longer look to politics to solve it because they don't have any trust in the political system or probably in MPs to do the right things. What else can people do alongside standing up to be counted?
Well, as churches, as I've said previously, parochial church councils and church wardens are actually very powerful people. They may not realise how powerful they are. They may not realise that they have the power to say no to the diocese, to say no to the bishops, but they do have that power. And it would be wonderful if they would use that power to say, no, actually, we are not going to do this. The diocese can be quite frightening in some circumstances. There have been rumours of clergy being threatened if they criticise On the Way and the plans. But the big thing is to have courage, to be ready and able to say the word no if you truly believe that your church should not be going down this route. And then, of course, the most valuable thing of all is to pray about it constantly. Because the one person who can help you to make the difference is Christ himself.
Ross, thank you very much. What a wonderful place to end on. So I'm going to say again, thank you very much for joining me. And I will be fascinated to see what response we get to this interview. And usually people come forward as a result of people talking about these interesting and sometimes worrying issues. So I will really look forward to seeing what the audience has to say. And if there are people out there who are sufficiently concerned about what you're describing and want to learn more, or particularly those who would like to stand up and be counted and help, then I'm going to say please get in touch with the UK column and tell us a little bit about yourself and what you'd like to do. But Ross, thank you very much.
One last thing that I would say, information about Save the Parish Cornwall can be found online. Simply type it in to your search engine and you will find Save the Parish Cornwall with much very interesting information.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thank you.